I'll be streaming the videos for the Big Ten championship game between Oregon and Penn State. So, starting with coaching in this game, both the coaches are really good. These are two of the top 10 best head coaches in the country. And it's not just the head coaches, they've each got a good coaching staff, too. So, James Franklin has a lot more experience than Dan Lanning does as a head coach. But I do think that Lanning is a better head coach than Franklin is. James Franklin's problem, like I've mentioned before, is he's lost nearly every big game that he's coached in. Now, you might not remember this because it's been so long ago, but James Franklin actually has won one Big Ten championship since he's been at Penn State. That was 8 years ago, back in 2016, and Penn State's not played for the conference championship since then. But at quarterback in this game, Oregon has the advantage by a lot. So Dylan Gabriel, of course, when you watch him play, his talent is obvious. He's probably the best quarterback in the country, but he's probably also the most experienced quarterback in the country. So there's not really anything that Penn State can throw at him in this game that he's not already seen. And when you watch him, he's so calm in the pocket. It's going to be hard for Penn State to make him uncomfortable. He's had a great season, throwing for 3,275 yards, and he's so accurate. He's completed 73.5% of his passes this season. And Disaster Al has had a pretty good year at quarterback for Penn State, except for the one time they went against an elite defense, Ohio State, where he played terrible. But this season, he's thrown for 2,668 yards, and he's been accurate, completing 71.6% of his passes. But this is concerning for Penn State because Oregon's got a defense that's close to as good as Ohio State's is. And if Disaster Hour can't play better in this game than he did against Ohio State, then Penn State has no chance of winning. To compare the quarterbacks, I'll give each quarterback's numbers when they played against Ohio State. Gabriel had 341 yards and completed 67.6% of his passes, and Aller had 146 yards and completed 60% of his passes. So a big difference. And at wide receiver, Oregon has a huge advantage here too. They've got three good receivers. Ted Johnson is probably a top five receiver in the country, and Evan Stewart and Treshawn Holden have had good seasons too. And Penn State doesn't have any wide receivers that would scare anybody, especially not Oregon. Harrison Wallace is their best receiver, but he doesn't even have huge numbers this season. And Penn State's got a five-star wide receiver from Ohio State, but he only has 14 catches this season. Now, the tight ends are great in this game. Penn State does have probably the best tight end in the country. Tyler Warren, he's by far Penn State's best pass catcher. He's caught 81 passes and has nearly 1,000 yards receiving this season. But Terrence Ferguson has had a good season at tight end for Oregon too. And at running back, both teams are pretty similar. Each team has a great running back combination. Oregon's combination of Jordan James and Noah Whittington, and Penn State's combination of Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen are two of the best running back combinations in the country. So Oregon's probably got the best running back in this game, Jordan James. He's got 1,166 yards rushing this season. And Nicholas Singleton is probably a little bit better of a running back than Katron Allen is, but they're both going to play in the NFL. And at the line of scrimmage in this game, both Oregon and Penn State are very physical teams, but this is concerning for Penn State because Penn State's offensive line has been good this season. They've played very well, except for the one time they went against an elite defensive line against Ohio State, and they got dominated. And Oregon's the defensive line is very similar to Ohio State's. They have got three of the best pass rushers in the country on their defensive line, and Oregon's offensive line held up fine when they played against Ohio State. So Oregon's Jordan Burch has only played in 8 games this season and still has 8.5 sacks. And Mateo Uyangale has 10.5 sacks this season. And Derek Harmon has 42 total quarterback pressures this season. Oregon's defensive line reminds me a lot of Ole Miss's defensive line because they've got several players that are probably either going to go first or second round in the draft. And Penn State's defensive line is very good too, but they've only got one player on theirs that's is good as these three players that Oregon has, and that's Abdul Carter, an amazing player. I'm sure he'll get picked at somewhere in the top 20 in the NFL draft next year. He's got 10 sacks and 54 tackles this season. So I would give Oregon the advantage at the line of scrimmage on both sides, at least by a little bit from what I've seen of these two teams this season. And defensively, Penn State hasn't been quite as good as they were last year, but they've still been really good. They're only giving up on average at 14 points a game, and Oregon's defense has been even better than it was last year. They're only averaging giving up 15.6 points per game. So at linebacker, I would give Oregon the advantage. Bryce Botcher from Oregon is their leading tackler this season with 80 tackles, and Jeffrey Bossa is Oregon's most experienced linebacker. He's really good, and Taitum Tuatoa or whatever his name is has done a very good job for Oregon at linebacker this season too. And Penn State's best at linebacker is Colby King. He's their second leading tackler this season with 62 tackles. But besides him, Penn State doesn't really have a linebacker that I would call great, but they're pretty good at linebacker too. And in the secondary, both teams are good. So at safety, each team is really good. Each has two of the best at safeties in the country. So Penn State's safeties, Jalen Reed and Zaki Wheatley, have a combined 135 tackles this season, and Reed is Penn State's top tackler this season with 75 tackles, and Oregon's safeties Tyshim Johnson and Colby Savage have a combined 109 tackles this season. Penn State may have a little bit of an advantage over Oregon at the safety position. And at cornerback, Oregon's got one of the best cornerbacks in the country, Jabbar Muhammad, who transferred in from Washington this season, and Brandon Johnson, who transferred to Oregon this year from Duke, has done a great job for them at cornerback also. And Penn State's best corner this season is AJ Harris, a transfer they brought in this year from Georgia. And Penn State's got other good cornerbacks too, but I would give Oregon the advantage at cornerback, I guess, by a little bit, because I don't think Penn State has a cornerback that's quite as good as Muhammad is. So I do think that this will be a close game. But when a team has a quarterback advantage, a coaching advantage, and an advantage at the line of scrimmage, like I think Oregon does, it's hard to pick against them. And I can't pick a little win Franklin to win a big game until I finally see him win one. And could this be the time that Penn State finally wins a big game? Maybe. I think they've got a chance to do it, but I've got to see it to believe it. So I've got Oregon getting the win, 27 to 20 over Penn State. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back tomorrow with a prediction video for the SEC championship game.